Chapter 1. The Drive-Through Theory. Pete Kraft hated dating apps. Not disliked. Hated. The kind of hate that brewed slowly, like bad coffee left on a burner too long. He tried them all. Swipe left, swipe right, super like, match, ghost, repeat. It was exhausting. People treated relationships like fast food, quick, cheap, and disposable. And the apps? They were the drive-through window. You never knew what you were going to get until you opened the bag. And by then, it was too late. He leaned back in his chair at work, staring at the blinking cursor on his monitor. His coworker, Greg, sat 2 feet away, scrolling on his phone. Pete's phone buzzed. A text. Greg. Hey man, you got the report ready? Pete turned his head slowly, like a horror movie villain. Greg was right there, breathing the same air. Pete raised an eyebrow. You could have just asked, Pete said flatly. Greg grinned without looking up. Texting's faster. Pete muttered under his breath. Society's doomed. He typed back yes just to end the conversation, but the irritation lingered. This was what he hated. Everyone glued to screens, even when human interaction was literally within arm's reach. Dating apps were just the romantic version of Greg's nonsense. Swipe, text, emoji, ghost. Repeat until your soul shrivels. Pete had sworn off them a year ago. No more profiles. No more awkward first dates where his companion spent more time photographing her avocado toast than talking. He remembered one date vividly. She'd ordered a latte, took 15 pictures of it, and then asked him what his sign was. He told her stop. She didn't laugh. That was before Renee. He still remembered the night he asked her out. It wasn't flashy. Just 2 people talking after a mutual friend's barbecue. Renee had this nervous energy, like she was waiting for a shoe to drop. When he asked if she wanted to grab dinner sometime, she hesitated, then blurted out like a confession. I have a daughter. She's 5. Pete blinked. Okay. She stared at him like he'd missed the point. Most guys, they don't stick around after that. Pete laughed. Really laughed. The kind that made her cheeks flush because she wasn't sure if he was mocking her or genuinely amused. That's great, he said, grinning. Bring her along. I'm sure we'll all have a blast. Her jaw dropped. You're serious? Dead serious. What's her name? Crissy. What does Crissy like to do? Pete leaned in, elbows on the table, like he was planning a mission. Movies? Parks? Dinosaurs? I need intel. Renee blinked again, then laughed. A soft, surprise sound that made Pete want to hear it again. That was the moment everything shifted. For her, for him. For the first time in years, dating didn't feel like a transaction. Felt real. 2 years later, Pete was still in love with Renee Fairchild. And he loved Crissy too. Loved the way she called him Pete, with that 7-year-old certainty. Loved her obsession with glitter and knock-knock jokes. He never wanted to replace her dad. Titles like mom and dad were sacred. You only got one of each. Pete had rules about that, rules that made sense to him even if they sounded old-fashioned. Respect mattered. But respect was exactly what he was starting to lose. Pete tossed his phone onto the couch and rubbed his face. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Dinner with Renee, maybe a movie, maybe just talking. He liked talking to her. Really talking, not texting emojis or sending memes. But then Jake showed up. Again. Jake Reynolds, the ex-Crissy's dad. Pete didn't hate the guy, hate was too strong. But he hated the way Jake acted like he still had a claim on Renee. Dropping by unannounced, hanging around like they were one big happy family. Pete had imagined boundaries when he started dating a single mom. Reality, boundaries were a myth. He grabbed his jacket and keys, muttering, 2 years, 2 years of patience. The memory of that first date came back as he drove. Renee had been so nervous, so sure he'd bail. He hadn't. He'd stayed. He'd shown up for birthdays, school plays, late-night calls when Crissy had the flu. He'd done everything right, or at least tried. And yet, every time Jake waltzed in with his easy grin and sideways jokes, Pete felt like an intruder in his own relationship. He hated games. Always had. And this felt like a game he never agreed to play. Later that night, Pete sat at his kitchen table, staring at the dark window. His phone buzzed again. Renee. Renee, sorry about tonight. Jake just showed up. I didn't know he was coming. Pete typed, then deleted, then typed again. It's fine. Was it? No. But he didn't want to start a fight over text. That wasn't him. He wanted to talk, face to face like people used to do before everything became a screen. He set the phone down and leaned back, thinking about the drive-through analogy he'd ranted about to Greg once. Dating apps were fast food. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe relationships were too, at least for some people. Quick fixes. No effort. No commitment. Just convenience. Pete didn't want convenience. He wanted permanence. And he was starting to wonder if Renee wanted the same, or if she was still stuck in neutral, circling the same roundabout with Jake forever. The next morning, Pete walked into work, coffee in hand. Greg looked up from his phone. Yo, you good? You look intense. Pete smirked. Just thinking. About what? Boundaries. Greg blinked. Like fences. Pete shook his head, chuckling. Never mind. Chapter 2. 2 years and counting. Renee Fairchild balanced a grocery bag on her hip while nudging the apartment door open with her shoulder. Crissy darted past her like a glitter-covered rocket, backpack bouncing. "Mom, guess what? We had pizza day at school," Crissy announced, dropping her shoes in the middle of the floor like landmines. "That's great, honey," Renee said, setting the bag on the counter. "Shoes by the door, please." Crissy sighed dramatically, scooped them up, and shuffled toward the entryway. Renee smiled despite herself. 7 going on 17. She glanced at the clock. Pete would be here in an hour. Dinner, a movie, maybe some quiet time after Crissy went to bed. Renee had been looking forward to it all week. Pete was steady, calm, the opposite of chaos. After 2 years together, she still felt that little thrill when he smiled at her like she was the only person in the room. She pulled out pasta and sauce, humming softly. Tonight would be simple, comfortable, perfect. The knock at the door shattered that illusion. Renee froze, wooden spoon in hand. Crissy squealed and ran to the door before Renee could stop her. "Daddy!" Crissy flung the door open, and there he was, Jake Reynolds, leaning against the frame like he owned the place. Same easy grin, same casual confidence that had once swept Renee off her feet and later left her drowning. "Hey, kiddo!" Jake scooped Crissy up, spinning her until she shrieked with laughter. "Miss me?" "Always." Crissy hugged his neck tight. Renee's stomach nodded. "Jake, what are you doing here?" Jake set Crissy down and strolled inside like he belonged. "Just thought I'd drop by. Spend some time with my favorite girl." Renee crossed her arms. "You could have called." Jake shrugged. "Would have ruined the surprise." Crissy tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, guess what? We had pizza day." Jake grinned. "Pizza day? That's huge. High five." He slapped her hand, then glanced at Renee. "You look good." Renee ignored the compliment. "Pete's coming over." Jake's smile didn't falter. "Cool. We can all hang out." Renee bit back a sigh. This was the problem. Jake acted like they were still a family, like Pete was just a guest in his house. And Renee, she let him, because it felt easier than a fight, because she wanted Crissy to see her parents getting along, because deep down, she still carried guilt for the mess Jake left behind. Crissy tugged Jake toward the couch. "Come see my new drawing." Jake winked at Renee as he followed. "Lead the way, kiddo." By the time Pete arrived, Renee had managed to boil pasta in simmer sauce, but her nerves were frayed. She opened the door to his familiar smile, and saw it falter when he spotted Jake lounging on the couch. "Hey," Pete said, voice even but eyes sharp. "Hi." Renee forced a smile. "Come in." Pete stepped inside, setting his jacket on the chair. "Jake." "Pete." Jake's tone was friendly, but there was an edge, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Crissy bounded over. "Pete, Daddy's here too. Isn't that great?" Pete crouched to hug her. "Hey kiddo, sounds like a party." Renee felt the tension crackle like static. She tried to smooth it over. "Dinner's almost ready." Jake smirked. "Hope you made enough for 3. Pete's jaw tightened. 4, he corrected softly, glancing at Crissy. Jake chuckled. "Right, 4. Dinner was a minefield disguised as spaghetti. Crissy chattered happily, oblivious to the silent war between the two men. Jake tossed out jokes, harmless on the surface, but Renee heard the undertones. "So, Pete," Jake said, twirling his fork, "you ever think about having your own children?" Pete smiled thinly. "Why? Are you volunteering to babysit?" Renee choked on her drink and Jake looked startled, before his grin returned unfazed. Jake shrugged. "Sure. Sounds like fun." Renee shot Jake a warning look. He ignored it. Pete didn't rise to the bait. He never did. That was Pete, calm, steady, refusing to play games. But Renee saw the flicker in his eyes, the quiet frustration he never voiced. After dinner, Crissy begged Jake to read her a story. Renee started clearing plates, heart heavy. Pete helped silently, stacking dishes with precision. When Jake's voice drifted from the living room, animated, charming, Renee felt the weight of 2 years pressing down. She wanted to believe she could balance this, that Pete understood, that Jake would eventually fade into the background. But tonight, watching Pete's shoulders stiffen as Jake laughed with Crissy, she wasn't so sure. Later, after Jake left with a casual, "See you around," Renee sank onto the couch. Pete stood by the door, jacket in hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Pete shook his head. "Don't be. Jake just shows up. I didn't know he was coming." "I know." Pete's voice was calm, but there was distance in it, a quiet wall she couldn't climb. "Pete," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's fine. Really." And then he was gone. Renee sat in the silence, heart aching. Crissy's laughter still echoed in her ears, but all she could hear was the unspoken truth. Pete was patient, but patience had limits. And she was running out of time. Chapter 3. The uninvited guest. Pete Kraft had a theory about Jake Reynolds. The man didn't knock because knocking implied permission. Jake didn't ask permission. He just appeared like a pop-up ad you couldn't close. Tonight was supposed to be different. Pete had planned it down to the last detail. Dinner at Renee's, a new movie Crissy had been begging to watch. Maybe a quiet hour afterward where he and Renee could talk without interruptions. 2 years together, and Pete still looked forward to those moments like a kid waiting for Christmas. He parked outside Renee's building, grabbed the bag of Crissy's favorite gummy bears from the passenger seat, and headed up the stairs. He could already picture her squeal when she saw them. That sound made every long day worth it. Pete knocked, smiling. The door opened, and there he was, Jake Reynolds, leaning against the couch like he owned the place, grinning like he'd just won something. Pete's smile froze. Jake. Pete. Jake's tone was smooth, friendly on the surface, but Pete heard the undertone, the same one he'd heard last time and the time before that. The one that said, "I was here first." Crissy barreled into Pete's legs. Pete. Pete crouched, hugging her tight. "Hey, kiddo." Renee appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her smile was strained. "Hi. Come in." Pete stepped inside, setting the gummy bears on the counter. "Brought these for you," he told Crissy. She gasped. "You're the best." She snatched the bag and ran to the couch, plopping down next to Jake. Pete glanced at Renee. "Dinner smells good. Thanks." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Jake stretched, arm draped across the back of the couch. "I'm glad you came over, Pete. It's always nice when you visit." Pete's jaw tightened. "I'm sure it is." Jake chuckled. Dinner was spaghetti. Simple, comforting, and tonight, completely ruined. Crissy chattered happily, oblivious to the silent tension crackling across the table. Renee tried to keep the conversation light, but Jake had other plans. "So, Pete," Jake said casually, twirling his fork, "still working that 9 to 5 grind? Must be nice, clocking out and forgetting about work." Pete smiled thinly. "I like what I do." Jake shrugged. "Sure, stability's good. Some people need that." Renee shot Jake a look. "Jake." "What?" Jake grinned. "Just making conversation." Pete didn't take the bait. He never did. But inside, something twisted. He hated games, and this was a game. A stupid, petty game where Jake played the charming ex and Pete played the guy who didn't belong. Crissy interrupted with a knock-knock joke that made everyone laugh, and for a moment, the tension eased. But Pete felt it creeping back like a shadow. After dinner, Crissy begged Jake to read her a story. Renee started clearing plates. Pete helped silently, stacking dishes with precision. Jake's voice drifted from the living room, animated, confident, like he was auditioning for Father of the Year. Pete dried his hands, watching Renee. She looked tired, torn, and Pete hated that he was making her feel that way. He hated that Jake could waltz in and turn their night upside down without consequence. He hated that he cared this much. When Jake finally left with a casual, "See you around," Pete stood by the door, jacket in hand. Renee hovered near the couch, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Pete shook his head. "Don't be. Jake just shows up. I didn't know he was coming." "I know." Pete's voice was calm, but inside, a storm brewed. 2 years of patience. 2 years of biting his tongue. 2 years of pretending this didn't bother him. "Pete," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's fine. Really." And then he walked out. In the car, Pete gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He wasn't angry, not in the shouting, slamming doors kind of way. He was tired. Bone-deep tired of competing for space in a life he'd been invited into. Tired of feeling like a guest in a relationship he'd invested everything in. He loved Renee. He loved Crissy. But love wasn't enough if boundaries didn't exist. And tonight, Pete realized something he'd been avoiding for months. If nothing changed, he couldn't stay. Chapter 4. Lines in the sand. Renee Fairchild stared at the empty doorway long after Pete left. His words, "It's fine." Really? Echoed in her head like a hollow bell. It wasn't fine. She knew it. He knew it. And the worst part? She had no idea how to fix it. Crissy was curled up on the couch, coloring a unicorn with glitter pens. Renee forced a smile when her daughter looked up. "Mommy, Daddy said he might take me to the zoo next weekend." Crissy beamed. "That's nice," Renee said softly, throat tight. She didn't want to ruin Crissy's excitement, but the thought of Jake making plans without asking her first made her stomach twist. She gathered the dishes from dinner, moving on autopilot. The apartment felt too quiet now, even with Crissy humming to herself. Pete's absence was a weight pressing down on her chest. Later that night, after Crissy was asleep, Renee called her mom. She needed a voice of reason, someone who wouldn't sugarcoat the truth. Her mom answered on the second ring. "Renee, everything okay?" Renee sank onto the bed. "Not really. What happened?" Pete left. He didn't yell or anything. He just walked out. Her mom's voice sharpened. "Because of Jake?" Renee closed her eyes. "He showed up again. Unannounced." A sigh crackled through the phone. "Honey, we've talked about this. You can't keep letting Jake waltz in whenever he feels like it." "I know," Renee whispered. I wanted Crissy to see us getting along. I thought it was the mature thing to do." Her mom's tone softened. "Getting along is one thing. Letting him disrupt your life is another." Renee swallowed hard. "Pete's been so patient. For 2 years. And I've been blind." "You haven't been blind," her mom said gently. You've been trying to do right by your daughter, but you also need to do right by yourself. After the call, Renee sat in silence, memories flooding back. Memories she'd buried because they hurt too much. Jake had been charming once. Funny, spontaneous, the kind of guy who made ordinary days feel like adventures. She'd fallen hard, fast. And then Crissy came along, and everything changed. For exactly 57 days after Crissy's birth, Jake played the role of devoted dad. Then he vanished. No calls, no visits. Renee spent sleepless nights rocking a newborn, wondering what she'd done wrong. Her parents stepped in, thank God. But the shame burned. She defended Jake to everyone, even when he didn't deserve it. And then, months later, Jake reappeared like nothing happened. No apology, no explanation. Just that grin and a promise to do better. The pattern repeated, grand gestures, then silence. Over and over until Renee stopped expecting consistency. She'd held on to hope for too long. Hope that Jake would grow into the father Crissy deserved. But then she met Pete. Steady, calm. The missing piece she hadn't known she needed. He didn't sweep her off her feet. He anchored her. And now she was losing him because she couldn't let go of old habits. The next morning, Renee dropped Crissy at school and drove to her parents' house. Her mom was in the kitchen, kneading dough like she was preparing for battle. You look like you didn't sleep, her mom said. I didn't. Renee sat at the table. I think I've been making excuses for Jake. For years. Her mom nodded. You have. Renee winced. Thanks for the subtlety. Her mom softened. Honey, you're a good mother. You wanted Crissy to feel loved by both parents. That's admirable. But Jake isn't consistent. And Pete is. I know. Renee's voice cracked. He's everything I didn't know I needed. And I've been treating him like he's temporary. Her mom reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Then stop. Draw the line. Jake doesn't get to run your life anymore. Renee nodded slowly. I will. Chapter 5. The breaking point. Pete Kraft had never been the guy who slammed doors or raised his voice. He didn't believe in drama. Drama was for reality TV and people who thought emojis counted as communication. Pete was calm, steady, until tonight. He sat in his car outside Renee's building, staring at the dashboard clock. 6:58 p.m. He'd been parked for 10 minutes, debating whether to go in. Part of him wanted to turn the key, drive home, and let silence speak for him. But that wasn't Pete. He didn't ghost. He didn't play games. If he was done, he'd say it to her face. He grabbed the small gift bag from the passenger seat, a book Crissy had been asking for, and headed up the stairs. His chest felt tight, like he was walking into a storm he couldn't avoid. Renee opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hey! Pete stepped inside. Hey! He handed her the bag. For Crissy. Her face softened. She'll love it. Pete glanced around. Jake was there. Again. Sitting on the couch like he owned the place, flipping through Crissy's coloring book. Pete's jaw clenched. Pete! Crissy ran over, hugging his legs. Daddy's here too. We're gonna play a game. Pete crouched, hugging her back. Sounds fun, kiddo. Jake grinned. Pete, good to see you, man. Pete straightened slowly. Jake. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. Renee hovered near the kitchen, twisting the towel in her hands. Pete took a breath. Renee, can we talk? Jake smirked. Sure, we can all talk. Pete's eyes locked on Renee. Alone. Renee hesitated, then nodded. Jake, can you give us a minute? Jake raised his hands in mock surrender. Hey, no problem. I'll just hang with Crissy. Pete followed Renee into the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound for a moment. Pete, she began. He held up a hand. Calm, controlled, but his voice carried weight. I can't do this anymore. Renee's breath caught. What? Pete's gaze was steady. I've been patient for 2 years. I knew dating a single mom wouldn't be easy. I knew there'd be challenges. But this, he gestured toward the living room. This isn't a challenge. It's chaos. Pete, no. His tone sharpened, not loud, but firm. I'm not asking you to cut Jake out of Crissy's life. He's her dad. I respect that. But I refuse to compete with a man who walked out on you more than once. Renee flinched. I'm not. You are. Pete's voice cracked with emotion he hadn't planned to show. Every time he shows up unannounced, every time plans change because Jake decides he wants to play family for a night, you let it happen. And I'm left standing here wondering if I matter at all. Tears welled in Renee's eyes. You do matter. Actions speak louder than words. Pete's jaw tightened. If you ever figure out what boundaries look like, give me a call. But I'm not going to keep waiting for you to respect me. Her lips trembled. Pete, please. He shook his head. Either you and Jake get back together and stop messing with your daughter's sanity, or you set boundaries with him. Because I refuse to live like this. The silence was deafening. Renee stared at him, pale and stunned. Jake's laughter drifted from the living room, oblivious. Pete stepped back, voice low but final. If that's the life you want, enjoy it. But leave me out of your chaos. And then he walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and Renee felt the world tilt. Her past, present, and the future she might have lost slammed into her like a hurricane. She stood frozen, towel clutched in her hands, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Jake appeared in the doorway, brows raised. What was that about? Renee turned slowly, eyes blazing. You. Jake blinked. Me? Yes, you. Her voice cracked like a whip. You show up whenever you feel like it, you play the perfect dad for an hour, and then you disappear for weeks. Do you have any idea what that does to Crissy? To me? Jake frowned. I'm just trying to be involved. Involved? Renee laughed bitterly. You were involved for 57 days after she was born. Then you vanished. And every time you come back, you twist my life into a roundabout with no exits. Jake's jaw tightened. I'm her father. And I'm her mother. Renee shot back. Which means I get to decide what's healthy for her. And this? She gestured wildly toward the door Pete had walked through. Isn't healthy. Jake stared at her, stunned. So what, you're choosing him over our family? Renee's voice dropped to a deadly calm. We don't have a family, Jake. We have you showing up when it's convenient. Jake opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had no comeback. Renee sank onto the couch after Jake left, head in her hands. Crissy peeked out from her room, clutching the book Pete had brought. Mommy? Her voice was small. Is Pete mad? Renee swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Pete's sad, honey, but Mommy's going to fix it. Crissy nodded solemnly and disappeared back into her room. Renee stared at the door, determination hardening in her chest. Pete wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for respect. And she was done letting fear dictate her choices. She grabbed her phone and opened Pete's contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet. First, she had to prove it. Chapter 6. Hurricane Realization. She sat quietly thinking about the look in Pete's eyes. He was serious, not playing games, and he drew his line in the sand. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. She'd seen Pete upset before. Frustrated, quiet, but never like this. Never final. She sank onto the chair, staring at the empty doorway. The words replayed in her head, sharp and merciless. I can't do this anymore. Actions speak louder than words. If you ever figure out what boundaries look like, give me a call. Boundaries. The word hit like a slap. She thought she was being mature, letting Jake come and go for Crissy's sake. She told herself it was healthy, proof that divorced parents could coexist without bitterness. But now, sitting in the wreckage of her choices, she saw the truth. She hadn't been mature. She'd been afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of disappointing Crissy. Afraid of drawing a line and sticking to it. And Pete had been waiting. Not asking, not demanding, waiting. For 2 years he'd been patient, steady, consistent. And she'd taken that steadiness for granted. Crissy's laughter drifted from her room, innocent and bright. Renee's throat tightened. Her daughter deserved stability, not this revolving door of chaos. Jake's pattern was carved into her memory like scars. 57 days. That's how long he stayed after Crissy was born. 57 days of promises and plans, of late-night feedings where he swore he'd never leave. Then one morning he was gone. No note, no call, just silence. Renee had spent nights rocking a screaming newborn, wondering what she'd done wrong. Her parents stepped in, thank God, but the shame burned. She'd defended Jake to everyone, even when he didn't deserve it. And then, months later, he reappeared like nothing happened. No apology, no explanation, just that grin and a promise to do better. The cycle repeated. Grand gestures, then vanishing acts. Over and over until Renee stopped expecting consistency. She told herself she was strong, independent, capable. But deep down, she was tired, bone-deep tired of hoping Jake would change. And then Pete came along. Funny, calm, steady. He didn't sweep her off her feet. He anchored her. He listened, really listened, when she confessed she had a daughter. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He laughed and said, "That's great. Bring her along." That was the day her life shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to start moving forward instead of spinning in circles. And now, she was about to lose him, because she couldn't let go of old habits. The realization hit like a hurricane, tearing through every excuse she'd clung to. She saw their relationship through Pete's eyes, every plan interrupted, every evening hijacked by Jake's unannounced visits. Every time Pete smiled and said, "It's fine," while silently wondering if he mattered. He mattered. God, he mattered more than anyone had in years. And she'd been treating him like an afterthought. Renee pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting tears. She wasn't going to lose Pete. Not without a fight. But words wouldn't fix this. Pete didn't want promises. He wanted proof. He wanted boundaries. And for the first time, Renee understood what that meant. She grabbed her phone and scrolled to Jake's name. Her thumb hovered over the call button, heart pounding. She wasn't nervous, she was furious. Furious at Jake for his games. Furious at herself for letting him play them. Furious that Crissy's life had been a carousel of instability because Renee couldn't say no. She hit call. As the phone rang, Renee's mind flashed back to a night 2 years ago. Crissy barely 5. Jake freshly returned from one of his disappearing acts. He'd shown up with flowers and a smile, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. "Miss me?" he'd said, leaning in the doorway. Renee had wanted to slam the door. Instead, she let him in. Because Crissy's face lit up like Christmas morning. Because Renee was tired of being the bad guy. Because hope was a stubborn thing. That night, Jake promised he'd changed. He stayed for a week. Then he vanished again. Renee had sworn she wouldn't fall for it next time. But she did. Again and again. Until Pete came along and showed her what real consistency looked like. Jake answered on the second ring, voice casual. Hey, what's up? Renee's tone was ice. We need to talk. Jake's voice snapped her back to the present. Talk about what? About boundaries, Renee said, steady and firm. You don't get to show up whenever you feel like it. You don't get to derail my plans. You don't get to play family when it suits you. Jake laughed, incredulous. Whoa, where's this coming from? From reality, Renee shot back. You're Crissy's dad, and I want you in her life. But you're not my boyfriend. You're not part of my household. And you don't get to disrespect the man I'm with. Jake's tone hardened. So this is about Pete. This is about respect, Renee said. For me. For Crissy. For the life I'm building. Jake was silent for a beat. So what? I'm supposed to just give up my family because you found a new guy. Renee's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Jake, we've never been a family. I've been the family and you've been the guy who drops by to screw up my life when it's on track after you last visit. Jake scoffed. You think he's gonna stick around? Guys like that don't last. Renee's grip tightened on the phone. He lasted 2 years. Longer than you ever did. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Finally, Jake muttered. Fine. Whatever. No, Renee said sharply. Not whatever. This is how it's going to be. You call before you come. You respect my time. You respect my relationship. Or you stay away. Jake exhaled hard. You've changed. Renee smiled bitterly. No, I've grown up. She hung up before he could respond. Renee sat back, heart racing. For the first time in years, she felt free. Scared, yes, but free. She'd drawn the line. And now she had to show Pete she meant it. She opened her messages and typed, Renee, I need to see you. Tonight, please. She stared at the screen, then deleted it. No, words weren't enough. Pete deserved more than a text. He deserved proof. Renee stood, determination hardening in her chest. Tomorrow she'd make it clear, no more chaos. Just them. Chapter 7. The pattern breaks. Renee Fairchild woke up with a clarity that felt almost violent. No more excuses. No more roundabouts. Today, she was breaking the pattern. She dropped Crissy off at school, kissed her forehead, and promised, Mommy's fixing things. Crissy grinned, oblivious, clutching the book Pete had given her like treasure. That image burned in Renee's mind. Pete's quiet thoughtfulness, his steady presence, and the way she'd let chaos push him out the door. Not anymore. The cold November air hit her like a slap, but it felt good, clean, sharp, like the first breath after drowning. For the first time in years, Renee felt in control. Scared, yes, but free. She drove home, mind racing. Pete didn't know any of this yet. He didn't know she'd drawn the line, that she'd finally chosen him without being asked. And words wouldn't be enough. Pete didn't want promises. He wanted proof. Renee grabbed her phone and opened her notes app, fingers flying. Plan to fix this. 1. No Jake drop-ins. Ever. 2. Show Pete I'm serious. 3. Make it personal. Make it undeniable. Her eyes landed on the photo of Pete and Crissy from last summer. Both grinning, faces sticky with melted ice cream. That was what she wanted. That was what she was fighting for. That evening, Renee picked Crissy up from school. Her daughter climbed into the car, chattering about art class and pizza day. Renee smiled, heart aching with love and guilt. Mommy? Crissy asked suddenly. Is Pete mad? Renee swallowed hard. Pete's sad, honey, but Mommy's going to fix it. Crissy nodded solemnly. Good. I like Pete. Renee blinked back tears. Me too, baby. At home, Renee pulled out construction paper and markers. Want to help me make something special? Crissy's eyes lit up. Like a craft. Exactly. Renee smiled. We're going to make a sign. Crissy tilted her head. What should it say? Renee hesitated, then wrote the words slowly, carefully. No more chaos. Just us. Crissy grinned. That's funny. It's true, Renee whispered. They decorated the sign with glitter and stickers until it looked like a rainbow exploded. Crissy giggled, glue on her fingers, and Renee felt hope flicker in her chest. Tomorrow, she'd knock on Pete's door. Tomorrow she'd show him, not tell him, that she was done living in the past. Chapter 8. Radio silence. Pete Kraft stared at his phone like it was an enemy he couldn't defeat. The screen was dark, but it mocked him anyway. He'd been home for 2 days, and not a single message from Renee. Not a call. Not even a meme. Nothing. He tossed the phone onto the couch and scrubbed his hands over his face. He wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. He was tired. Tired of feeling like the third wheel in a relationship he'd invested 2 years into. Tired of wondering if he'd been a placeholder while Renee figured out what she wanted. He loved her. God help him, he loved her. And Crissy? That kid had him wrapped around her glitter-stained fingers. But love wasn't enough if respect wasn't part of the equation. Pete stood, pacing the living room. His apartment felt too quiet, too neat. No crayons scattered on the coffee table. No giggles from the hallway. No Renee humming while she cooked. Just silence and the hum of his thoughts. At work the next morning, Pete dropped into his chair with a sigh. Greg, his coworker and self-appointed life coach, glanced up from his phone. "Dude," Greg said, squinting, "you look like someone stole your dog." Pete smirked. "Don't have a dog. Then you look like someone stole your soul." Greg leaned back, grinning. "Trouble in paradise." Pete shot him a look. "Don't start." Greg held up his hands. "Hey, I'm just saying, you've been walking around like a zombie." "Spill." Pete hesitated, then muttered, "It's complicated." Greg snorted. "It's always complicated. That's why I stick to casual." Pete rolled his eyes. "Yeah, because nothing says emotional maturity like ghosting people." Greg grinned. "Better than suffering in silence." Pete didn't answer. He opened his laptop, trying to drown out the noise in his head. But Greg wasn't done. "You know what your problem is?" Greg said, tapping his phone like he was about to deliver wisdom from the mountaintop. "You care too much." Pete looked up. "That's a problem now? In this world?" Greg shrugged. "Yeah, people want fast food relationships. Swipe match done. You're out here trying to cook a 5-course meal." Pete stared at him, stunned. "Did you just accidentally make sense?" Greg grinned. "Happens sometimes." Pete shook his head, chuckling despite himself. "Go back to texting people who sit 2 feet away." Greg smirked. "Already did." By lunch, Pete had convinced himself not to text Renee. Not because he didn't want to, God, he wanted to, but because he meant what he said. He wasn't going to beg for respect. If Renee wanted him, she'd show him. If she didn't, well, he'd survive. Eventually, he scrolled through his phone anyway, thumb hovering over her name. He imagined what he'd write. "Hope you're okay. Miss you. Can we talk?" He deleted every draft before it existed. No, he wasn't going to cave. Not this time. That night, Pete sat on his couch, nursing a beer and staring at the ceiling. He thought about the first time he met Renee, her nervous smile, the way she confessed about Crissy like it was a deal breaker. He thought about how he laughed, how he said, "That's great. Bring her along." He thought about birthdays and school plays, about Crissy's knock-knock jokes and glitter explosions. He thought about Jake, about every time plans changed because Jake decided to play family for a night, about every time Pete smiled and said, "It's fine," while swallowing frustration like poison. And then he thought about the look on Renee's face when he walked out. Shock, hurt, fear. He hated that look, but he hated feeling invisible more. Pete closed his eyes, whispering into the quiet, "Please figure it out." Chapter 9. Proof of commitment. Renee Fairchild woke up with a plan, and for once, it wasn't just in her head. It was scribbled in her notes app, underlined twice. "Show Pete. Don't just tell him." She'd spent 2 days replaying his words, every syllable etched into her chest like stone. Actions speak louder than words. He wasn't wrong. She'd given him words for 2 years, promises, explanations, excuses. Now she needed action, and she knew exactly where to start. After dropping Crissy at school, Renee drove to the Kraft store. The aisles smelled like glue and glitter, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. She filled her basket with poster board, markers, stickers, and enough glitter to make a unicorn jealous. This wasn't just a sign, it was a declaration. When she picked Crissy up that afternoon, her daughter bounced into the car, ponytail swinging. "Mommy, did you fix it yet?" Renee smiled softly. "I'm working on it, baby. Want to help?" Crissy's eyes lit up. "Yes, what are we making?" "A sign," Renee said. "Something special for Pete." Crissy grinned. "Like a surprise?" "Exactly." Renee's throat tightened. "A surprise to show him how much we love him." At home, they spread supplies across the kitchen table. Crissy grabbed a purple marker and started doodling hearts before Renee even explained the plan. "What should it say?" Crissy asked, tongue poking out in concentration. Renee hesitated, then wrote the words slowly, carefully. "No more chaos. Just us." Crissy tilted her head. "That's funny." "It's true," Renee whispered. They decorated the sign with rainbows, stars, and enough glitter to blind a small army. Crissy giggled, glue on her fingers, and Renee felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear unraveling into hope. When the sign was done, Renee propped it against the wall and stared at it. It wasn't perfect, glitter smudges, crooked letters, but it was honest. It was everything she wanted to say without drowning Pete in apologies. Tomorrow she'd knock on his door. Tomorrow she'd show him, not tell him, that she was done living in the past. That night, after Crissy was asleep, Renee sat on the couch scrolling through old photos. Pete and Crissy at the park, faces sticky with melted ice cream. Pete holding Crissy's hand at the zoo, both laughing at something Renee couldn't remember. Pete in her kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking spaghetti like he owned the place. Her chest ached. She whispered into the quiet, "Please still love me." The next morning, Renee woke early. She packed Crissy's backpack, braided her hair, and kissed her forehead before school. "Wish me luck," she said. Crissy grinned. "Good luck, Mommy. Tell Pete I said hi." Renee smiled, heart pounding. "I will." She drove to Pete's apartment with the sign in the back seat and a knot of nerves in her stomach. Every mile felt heavier than the last. What if he didn't open the door? What if he'd already decided she wasn't worth the fight? What if she was too late? She parked, grabbed the sign, and climbed the stairs. Her hands shook as she knocked. Footsteps. Pause. Then the door opened. Pete stood there, hair tousled, eyes tired. And when he saw her, his expression froze. "Renee," he said slowly. "What are you?" She held up the sign before he could finish. Glitter sparkled in the morning light. "No more chaos. Just us." Pete stared at it, then at her. His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened just a fraction. Renee swallowed hard. "I set boundaries with Jake. Real ones. He's not going to show up unannounced anymore. I told him if he can't respect that, he stays away." Pete's brows lifted. "You did." "I did." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "I should have done it years ago. I thought I was doing the right thing for Crissy. But I was wrong. I was hurting you, and her, and I'm done." Pete was silent for a long moment. Renee's heart thudded like a drum. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. Chapter 10. The knock at the door. Pete Kraft wasn't expecting anyone. He'd spent the morning nursing coffee and staring at the same paragraph in a book for an hour, mind looping through the same questions. Was he too harsh? Did he overreact? Or had he finally done what needed to be done? The knock startled him. He set the mug down, heart thudding. For a second, he considered ignoring it. But then he heard a familiar voice, soft, steady, trembling just enough to break him. "Pete, it's me." He opened the door. Renee stood there, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and hope. In her hands, a poster board glittering like a disco ball. The words hit him like a punch. "No more chaos. Just us." Pete stared. His throat went dry. "Renee." She swallowed hard. "I set boundaries with Jake. Real ones. He's not going to show up unannounced anymore. I told him if he can't respect that, he stays away." Pete blinked. "You did." "I did." Her voice shook, but her gaze didn't. "I should have done it years ago. I thought I was doing the right thing for Crissy. But I was wrong. I was hurting you, and her, and I'm done." Pete's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But 2 years of frustration didn't vanish with glitter and promises. "Renee." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." She crossed the threshold slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. Pete closed the door and turned to face her. The sign leaned against her leg, absurdly bright in the dim apartment. "Crissy helped," Renee said softly. "She wanted to make something for you." Pete's heart twisted. "She's amazing. She loves you," Renee whispered. "So do I." Pete exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Renee, No, let me finish." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "You were right. Actions speak louder than words. I've been giving you words for 2 years. Excuses, explanations, promises. And you've been patient. So patient. I took that for granted. I thought you'd always be there, no matter what. And that wasn't fair." Pete stared at her, silent. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," she said. "I'm asking for a chance to prove it. To show you that I'm done living in the past. That I choose you. Every time." The room felt heavy, thick with everything unsaid. Pete wanted to speak, but his throat wouldn't cooperate. He'd imagined this moment 100 times, her choosing him finally. But now that it was here, he didn't know what to do with the ache in his chest. "Renee." His voice was rough. "I love you. I've loved you since the day you told me about Crissy and looked at me like you expected me to run. And I didn't. Because I didn't want easy. I wanted real. And you're real." Her eyes shimmered. "Then let me be real for you." Pete stepped closer, slowly, like he was afraid she'd vanish. "If we do this, no more games. No more Jake dropping in like he owns the place. No more chaos," she whispered, glancing at the sign. Pete almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, fragile, like the first breath after a storm. Pete pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in days, he felt steady again. A small voice broke the moment. "Mommy?" "Pete." Crissy peeked around the corner, clutching her backpack. "Are we happy now?" Pete laughed, really laughed, and scooped her up. "Yeah, kiddo. We're happy." Crissy grinned. "Good. Can we have pancakes?" Pete glanced at Renee, who was laughing through tears. "Pancakes sound perfect." They spent the rest of the morning in the kitchen, flipping pancakes and sprinkling chocolate chips while glitter from the sign clung to everything like confetti. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was real. And for Pete, that was enough. Chapter 11. The closure conversation. Pete Kraft wasn't nervous. Not exactly. He'd faced tougher things. Tight deadlines, broken servers, Greg's unsolicited dating advice. But sitting across from Jake Reynolds in a corner booth at the coffee shop, that was a different kind of challenge. Jake leaned back, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. He looked relaxed, but Pete knew better. Men like Jake didn't do relaxed. They did control. Appreciate you meeting me, Pete said evenly, stirring his coffee. Figured it was time we talked. Jake smirked. About what? Renee already gave me the lecture. Pete nodded. Good. Then this should be easy. Jake raised a brow. You're here to mark your territory? Pete's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. I'm here to make sure Crissy has stability. That's all. Jake chuckled. Stability. Big word. Pete ignored the jab. Look, Jake. I'm not trying to replace you. I never have. You're her dad. That's not my title and I respect that. But I'm with Renee. And that means I'm part of Crissy's life too. Jake's smirk faded a fraction. So what, you want me to disappear? No, Pete said firmly. I want boundaries. You call before you come. You respect Renee's time. You respect mine. And you stop treating her like she's still yours. Jake's eyes narrowed. You think you can tell me how to be a father? Pete leaned forward, voice low but steady. I'm not telling you how to be a father. I'm telling you how to stop being a disruption. The silence stretched. Jake's jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he didn't want to spit out. Finally, he said, You really love her, huh? Pete didn't hesitate. Yeah, I do. Jake studied him for a long moment, then exhaled. Fine, I'll call before I come. No more surprises. Pete nodded slowly. Good. Jake smirked again, but it lacked its usual bite. Guess you're not as boring as I thought. Pete almost smiled. Guess you're not as charming as you think. For the first time, Jake laughed. Genuine, sharp, almost grudging. Fair enough. When Pete walked out of the coffee shop, the air felt lighter. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. Boundaries weren't just words now. They were real. And for the first time in weeks, Pete believed this might actually work. That night, Renee called. Her voice was soft, hopeful. How did it go? Pete smiled faintly. Better than I expected. Thank you, she whispered, for doing that. Pete leaned back, closing his eyes. We're building something, Renee, and I want it to last. Her breath hitched. Me too. Chapter 12. New rules, new rhythm. Renee Fairchild had never realized how much peace could fit into a single day until now. It had been 2 weeks since the conversation that changed everything. 2 weeks since Pete walked back into her life, since Jake agreed to boundaries that once felt impossible. And for the first time in years, Renee's world didn't feel like a carousel spinning out of control. Felt steady. She was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Crissy sat at the table, coloring a picture of a unicorn wearing sunglasses. Pete leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled up, looking like he belonged there, and maybe, finally, he did. Chocolate chips or blueberries? Renee asked, holding up 2 bags. Both, Crissy declared, glitter still clinging to her hair from last week's Kraft project. Pete grinned. That's my girl. Renee shot him a look. You're encouraging chaos. Pete smirked. Controlled chaos. She laughed, a sound that felt lighter than it had in months. Fine. Both. The doorbell rang, and Renee stiffened. Old habits die hard. But then she remembered. Jake had called yesterday. He was coming to take Crissy to the park for an hour. He called. He'd asked. And Renee had said yes without feeling like her life was being hijacked. She opened the door to Jake, who stood with his hands in his pockets, looking different. Not smug. Not cocky. Just calm. Morning, he said. Morning, Renee replied, voice even. Jake glanced past her at Pete, who nodded politely. Pete. Jake, Pete said, tone neutral but not hostile. Crissy bounded over, backpack bouncing. Daddy, we made pancakes. Jake smiled. Save me one. Crissy giggled. Nope, they're all gone. Pete chuckled. She's not lying. Jake smirked faintly, then looked at Renee. We'll be back in an hour. Thanks for calling, Renee said pointedly. Jake nodded, trying to do better. And for the first time, Renee believed him, at least a little. After they left, Renee turned to Pete. That felt normal. Pete smiled. Normal's underrated. She stepped closer, resting her hands on his chest. Thank you for everything. Pete kissed her forehead, voice low. We're building something, Renee, and I want it to last. Her throat tightened. Me too. Later that afternoon, Jake returned on time. Crissy burst through the door, chattering about swings and slides. Jake lingered just long enough to say goodbye, then left without drama. No digs at Pete. No lingering looks at Renee. Just respect. Renee closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling. Pete was on the couch, reading a book Crissy had abandoned. He looked up and their eyes met. No words were needed. This was what they'd fought for. This was what they'd almost lost. That night, after Crissy was asleep, Renee curled up next to Pete on the couch. The TV played softly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. Pete's arm was around her, steady and warm, and for the first time in years, Renee felt safe. Think we can keep this up? She whispered. Pete kissed her temple. We can. Because now we're on the same team. Renee smiled, tears pricking her eyes. I love you. Pete's voice was quiet, certain. I love you too. Epilogue. Glitter and promises. The Fairchild apartment smelled like cinnamon and chaos. Crissy was on the floor, surrounded by construction paper, glue sticks, and enough glitter to make the carpet sparkle for the next decade. Renee sat cross-legged beside her, laughing as she tried and failed to keep the mess contained. Mommy, Crissy announced, holding up a lopsided heart covered in sequins. This one's for Pete. Renee smiled, heart swelling. He's going to love it. Crissy grinned. Because he loves us. Renee swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Yeah, baby, he does. Pete arrived just as Crissy was adding the finishing touches to her masterpiece. He knocked, then peeked in with that familiar smile. The one that still made Renee's stomach flip after 2 years. Permission to enter the glitter zone? He teased. Crissy squealed. Pete! She launched herself at him, glitter and all. Pete caught her easily, laughing as sparkles clung to his shirt. Wow, he said, surveying the living room. Looks like a unicorn exploded in here. Art, Crissy declared proudly. For you. Pete crouched, examining the glittery heart. This is amazing. Best art I've ever seen. Crissy beamed. You can keep it forever. Pete glanced at Renee, eyes warm. I plan to. Later, after Crissy was tucked in and the glitter apocalypse somewhat contained, Pete and Renee sat on the couch. The TV hummed softly in the background, but neither of them paid attention. Pete reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Renee froze. Pete. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple gold band. Not flashy, not loud, just steady, like him. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Pete said quietly. I just want you to know. I see a future with you. With Crissy. With us. Renee's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision. Pete. He smiled faintly. No more chaos. Just us. She laughed through tears, the words hitting like a promise. Just us. Crissy's voice floated from the hallway, sleepy but loud enough to make them both laugh. Did you say pancakes tomorrow? Pete grinned. Always.